In a crowded restaurant right between the clinking glasses and the soft music, my granddaughter looked straight at me and said, "Grandma is just a burden, why is she even here?" Her little voice sliced through the room like a blade. 32 diners stopped eating, chairs stilled. A fork clattered to a plate somewhere behind me, and next to her, my daughter-in-law smirked. My son, he actually laughed as if watching me crumble was some kind of entertainment. My hands trembled, my throat tightened, my heart pulsed with a sting deeper than the words themselves. But I didn't defend myself, I didn't make a scene, I simply picked up my purse, stood up, and walked out without a single word. What none of them knew, not my son, not my granddaughter, and definitely not the woman who'd been waiting years to push me out, was that by morning, their entire future would be at risk. And the path to that moment started far earlier than any of them ever realized. Before we go back, before I show you how one cruel sentence set off a domino effect they never saw coming, let me introduce myself. I'm Eleanor. 68 years old. A mother who worked double shifts, stitched hems at midnight, and saved every spare dollar just to give my son a life I never had. A grandmother who celebrated every milestone, every scraped knee, every school play, even when I wasn't invited. And somehow, I became the burden in my own family. If you're new here, let me tell you why you should subscribe. Because the stories I share aren't just stories, they're warnings, they're lessons, they're reminders that the quiet people in the room. They're often the ones holding everything together, and when those quiet people finally stand up, everything changes. Now let's step back, not to the restaurant, but to a few weeks before it. When tiny moments began piling up like snow on a weak roof. A cold glance from my daughter-in-law, a whisper that stopped when I entered the room, a sudden schedule conflict when I asked to watch my granddaughter. Small things. Subtle things, the kinds of things you brush off because you hope, you pray, you're imagining them, but I wasn't. The distance grew, the tone shifted, and slowly I went from "Mom, can you help?" to "We'll handle it ourselves." I didn't realize then that a decision had already been made about me long before the restaurant, long before the slap of words, long before the humiliation. And none of them had any idea that the moment I quietly walked out that night was the moment their lives began to turn upside down. You're not ready for what came next. A few weeks before that night in the restaurant, the shift in my family felt small. So small I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. It started with my son, Daniel. He used to call me every evening, short calls, simple updates, nothing grand, but they made my nights warmer. Then the calls turned into texts, then into nothing at all. I told myself he was busy, work, life, stress. But a mother knows when the distance isn't accidental, and it wasn't long before I discovered where that distance was coming from. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by their house with a tin of my granddaughter's favorite cookies. A simple surprise. Something small, something loving. When I knocked, I heard footsteps, tiny ones first, then the heavier ones I recognized as my daughter-in-law, Lacey. The door cracked open just enough for her face to appear. "Oh, Eleanor. We weren't expecting you." Not welcome, not come in, not even a polite smile, just a stiff reminder that I wasn't wanted. "I brought cookies for Lily," I said softly. Her eyes flicked to the tin, then back to me, cold. Calculating, she doesn't need sweets, we're trying to teach her healthy habits. But thanks. She didn't reach for them, didn't invite me inside, didn't call Lily to the door. Just pushed her hair behind her ear and waited for me to leave. That was the moment I first felt it. The painful truth that I was no longer seen as part of their home, just an inconvenience waiting on the porch. Still, I loved them. And love makes you forgive things you shouldn't, so I stepped back, gave them space, waited for an invitation that never came, and then the comments started. Little things dropped in conversation, a joke Lacey made about old-fashioned thinking, a sigh when I didn't understand a new app, a whisper to my son that she thought I was too involved. My son always said the same thing. "Mom, you're overthinking, she doesn't mean anything by it." But a woman can feel when the walls are closing in around her, and every week those walls got tighter. The week before the restaurant incident was when everything truly shifted. I overheard something small, something whispered but sharp enough to leave a bruise. Lacey was talking to a friend on speakerphone, not realizing I had walked into the hall. "She's just too much. always around, always calling. Daniel won't say it, but I will. His mother is exhausting. My chest tightened. My eyes burned, exhausting, a burden, unwanted. But I swallowed the hurt and stayed quiet because Daniel walked into the room a second later, kissed Lacey on the forehead, and told her he loved her. That moment told me everything. I wasn't losing my son accidentally. I was being pushed out carefully, quietly, piece by piece. What none of them knew was that this slow, painful unraveling was setting the stage for the moment everything in their lives would turn upside down. And it all began the night I walked into that restaurant. The night before the restaurant incident, I sat in my living room staring at the invitation Daniel had mailed me. A family dinner, a simple outing, just the four of us. Except it didn't feel simple anymore. Not with the way Lacey had been acting, not with the way Daniel kept drifting further away. Still, I ironed my blouse, put on the necklace my late husband bought me, and told myself maybe tonight will be different. Maybe they'll actually want me there, but deep down I felt a knot forming, a quiet warning, and that morning something happened that made the knot tighten. My phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "Moms, don't dress too formally tonight. Lacey wants the vibe casual." It was harmless, right? Just clothing advice. But I'd been a mother long enough to read between the lines. This wasn't about my outfit. This was about Lacey making sure I didn't stand out in the pictures she planned to take. Still, I texted back, "Of course, sweetheart." Because mothers always choose softness even when the world offers sharp edges. Later that afternoon, I stopped by a small boutique to get a cardigan to match my blouse. A young woman at the counter smiled warmly. "Going somewhere special tonight?" I opened my mouth to say yes, to say I'm having dinner with my family, to say my son invited me, but instead my voice cracked. "Something like that?" She didn't pry, just handed me the bag gently, like she sensed I needed tenderness. Those tiny moments of kindness always seemed to come from strangers lately, never the people I raised. By the time I arrived at the restaurant, I'd rehearsed a dozen ways to make the evening pleasant. Be cheerful, be helpful, don't say too much, don't embarrass anyone. The door opened, and for a moment, seeing my granddaughter Lily's bright smile, I felt hopeful again. "Grandma," she squealed and ran into my arms. My heart lifted, just enough to forget the weight of everything else. But then I heard the voice behind her, Lacey, sharp, controlled, ready to correct anything that didn't fit her narrative. "Lily, baby, don't wrinkle Grandma's clothes. She tried very hard today." The emphasis wasn't missed. Neither was the tight, fake smile. Daniel kissed my cheek, warm but quick, distracted, pulled by someone else's orbit. And inside the restaurant, I felt the shift immediately. The hostess greeted them with enthusiasm, then looked at me with polite indifference. Our table was beautifully set. Cameras were already out. Everything curated for Lacey's perfect family image. Everything except me. Lacey kept adjusting Lily's hair, fixing Daniel's collar, moving napkins, angling her body toward the best lighting, but never once looking at me. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a guest in a family I had built with my own hands. What I didn't know then was that this uneasy dinner, this quiet dismissal, was the final step before the public humiliation waiting for me the next night. In the moment, their entire future began falling apart. The dinner itself hadn't even truly begun when the tension slid into place like a shadow none of us wanted to acknowledge. We hadn't ordered yet. Menus were still open. Lily was coloring in the little activity sheet. And that's when it started. Small things, subtle enough that a stranger might have missed them, but I didn't. Lacey's sigh every time I asked Lily a question, her exaggerated glances at Daniel whenever I shared a small story from Lily's childhood. Her whispered, "Can you tell your mom to lower her voice?" even though I was speaking softly. And Daniel, my grown son, the boy I raised to respect every person he met, kept shrinking in his seat as though agreeing with her would somehow make the evening smoother. My chest tightened with a pain I couldn't quite name. Still, I tried. I kept smiling, kept finding gentle ways to join the conversation without stepping on the invisible lines Lacey had drawn. But then dessert menus came out and something shifted. Lacey pulled her phone out and started arranging us for photos. Pictures, of course, her favorite currency. Daniel, move next to me. Lily, fix your hair. Mom, she stopped. Looked me up and down, tilted her head. Maybe sit this one out. I want the aesthetic to be clean. The word clean hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, softly, quietly, and nodded, but Lily, sweet Lily, looked confused. Why can't Grandma be in the picture? She asked. Lacey's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch. Because, she said with a smile that carried no warmth, Grandma already had plenty of photos at the last event. The last event where she had cropped me out before posting them online. I felt my cheeks warm, not anger, not yet, just hurt, bone-deep hurt. A waitress walked by and for a moment her sympathetic glance told me everything. She saw it, everyone saw it, but the worst moment was still coming. As the photos continued, Lacey posed like it was a magazine shoot. Daniel followed her lead, and I truly tried to stay invisible enough to keep the peace. But Lily, children don't understand invisible rules. She tugged on Lacey's sleeve. Mommy, can Grandma be in the picture now? That was the spark. The tiny match that lit the fuse all of them had been pretending didn't exist. Lacey rolled her eyes loud enough to feel like a slap. And she muttered not quietly enough words that would echo in my bones even hours later. Honestly, she's just becoming a burden. My breath caught, my heart dropped, and 32 diners looked up at once. That was the moment the humiliation began, but not the moment it ended. Because neither Lacey nor Daniel had any idea that the decision I made that night would lead to the consequences waiting for them the next morning. Consequences they never imagined their burden could trigger. The restaurant had gone quiet after Lily's whisper, but what none of them knew was that the cracks in this family started months before that night. And honestly, looking back, I should have seen all of it coming. It began with small changes. Always small things that didn't feel small once they piled up. Like the first time Daniel told me awkwardly that Lacey preferred I text before visiting, even though I lived 7 minutes away. Or when Lily stopped calling me Grandma and started calling me Marion because, as Lacey explained, Grandma sounds old and I don't want her learning labels that make aging seem normal. As though my existence was now an inconvenience that needed softening. And Daniel, my sweet, gentle boy, kept insisting it was just because they were adjusting to modern parenting. But every adjustment seemed to push me 1 inch farther out of their lives. 1 inch away from dinners we used to share, 1 inch away from Lily's milestones, 1 inch away from the son who once hugged me every morning before school and whispered, "I'll always take care of you, Mom." And maybe that's why I'm telling this story here, why so many of you return to listen. Because the people who hurt us most are so often the ones we once trusted completely. If you're new here, I share stories that remind us why we never ignore the small red flags because they always lead somewhere. So if you want more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens when emotional neglect finally snaps into reality. But back to that slow unraveling, Lacey had always been polite. The kind of polite that comes wrapped in compliments sharp enough to bleed. "You're so sweet to try cooking at your age. Oh, Marion, you dress so cozy. I wish I had that confidence. Daniel says you used to be very smart." That's adorable. Every word dipped in sugar, every intention dipped in poison. And Daniel, trying so hard to keep peace between 2 women he loved, kept saying, "She doesn't mean it like that. She's stressed. She's just joking." But jokes don't leave bruises on hearts. And one day, I walked into their home and heard Lacey laughing with a friend. "She's harmless. Honestly, a bit of a burden, but at least she tries." A burden, the same word Lily would soon repeat at that restaurant table without understanding its weight. I stood in the hallway, frozen, listening, realizing this was no misunderstanding. No rough patch, no mother-in-law cliché. This was a woman who'd been waiting for the perfect moment to shove me out completely. And that moment finally arrived in that restaurant. But what she didn't know, not then, not even as she smirked at my pain, was that her own future was already balancing on a fault line. And the slightest shift was going to shake everything she relied on, everything. The night after that restaurant humiliation, I couldn't sleep. Not because of Lily's words, not because of Lacey's smirk, not even because of Daniel's laugh. It was something else, something deeper. Something that had been building for months like a storm waiting for the right sky. Because for the first time, I realized they didn't just see me as less, they saw me as disposable. And that thought, that quiet, aching thought, settled into my chest like a stone. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my tea, hands trembling just a little, trying to make sense of how we'd gotten here. My son used to call me every day, every single day. Now, weeks would pass before he remembered I existed. And when he did call, it was only to ask for something. A loan, childcare, a favor, never just love. And the truth that hurt most, I always said yes, always, because mothers don't know how to stop giving. But that morning, that quiet, aching morning, I felt something shift inside me, something tired, something done. And for the first time, I wondered what if stepping away wasn't losing them, but finally finding myself again. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet, not without understanding how my own granddaughter learned to call me a burden. So I started replaying memories one by one, trying to find where everything went wrong. I remembered a day in spring when Lily crawled into my lap and played with my necklace the way she used to when she was little. And Lacey said, "Careful, sweetheart, Grandma's jewelry is sentimental. It might fall apart." Fall apart, like I was a fragile antique they kept around out of obligation. Another time, I offered to take Lily to the park. Lacey smiled that stiff smile and said, "I'd rather she not get used to relying on older people. It's unfair to them." Unfair, as though loving her granddaughter was some exhausting chore I was barely capable of managing. And Daniel. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor, pretending not to hear. Every memory I replayed that morning hurt a little more than the last. But the worst one, it was from just a week before the restaurant. Lacey had invited her friends over. Their laughter filled the house, bright, loud, careless. I was carrying snacks into the living room when one of them said, "Oh, is that your cleaner?" And Lacey, without even looking at me, said something like that. Something like that. A mother, a grandmother, a woman who'd survived heartbreak and loss to raise her son alone, reduced to something like that. That morning, as the memories stacked up like dominoes, I finally understood this wasn't one bad dinner. Or one disrespectful child, or one cruel slap. This was a pattern, a slow, deliberate erosion of my place in their lives, but they had no idea that removing me would remove something far bigger than they ever imagined. And soon, the consequences of that erosion would begin showing themselves, piece by piece. The day after the restaurant incident, I still hadn't heard a word from any of them, no apology, no explanation, not even a text, just silence. And somehow that silence felt louder than the slap itself. But while they ignored me, someone else didn't. My phone buzzed just after sunrise. It was a message from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, someone who never reached out unless something was wrong. My late husband's attorney. My breath caught for a moment. He hadn't contacted me in years, not since after my husband passed and we finalized all the documents. Why now? Why today, less than 24 hours after being told I was a burden in front of a room full of strangers? I opened the message. "Marian, I need to discuss something important with you. Call me when you're available." Important. The words settled in my stomach like a weight. Part of me felt nervous. Part of me felt confused. And part of me felt something else entirely. A stir, a shift, a quiet sense that something I'd forgotten was finally waking up. I dialed his number slowly, pressing the phone to my ear as my hands trembled. "Marian," he answered warmly, like he'd been waiting for my call. "I was hoping you'd reach out quickly." "Is everything all right?" My voice cracked softly. "Your message sounded serious." "It is," he replied. "And it's about your family." My heart clenched. "Has something happened?" "Not yet," he said gently, "but something is scheduled to happen soon and you're involved in ways you may not remember." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What does this have to do with me?" "Well," he continued, "do you recall the documents your husband updated shortly before he passed?" I swallowed hard. "Some of them," I admitted. But it's been years, why are they relevant now? Because, he said slowly, certain protections, conditions, and decisions he put into place are connected directly to Daniel and his household. Connected to Daniel, his household. My pulse quickened, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, the family that mocked me for simply existing at dinner. What kind of decisions? I asked. He paused, not dramatic, not theatrical, just careful. The kind, he finally said, that could influence their future stability in a very real way. A chill rippled down my back, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted harm, but because something was shifting quietly, inevitably, and they didn't even know it. What do I need to do? I asked softly. For now, he replied, just come to my office tomorrow morning. There's paperwork your husband left behind that you need to review, documents you never signed because you weren't meant to until the right moment. The right moment, and suddenly I understood something. The restaurant humiliation wasn't the turning point, it was just the spark. Tomorrow morning, everything would begin unfolding, and they had no idea how close they were to losing something they assumed was untouchable. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I'd slept well, I hadn't. My mind had replayed that restaurant moment over and over again, my granddaughter's voice, my daughter-in-law's smirk, my son's laugh. All of it still sat on my chest like a weight I couldn't move, but underneath that heaviness, something else was forming, a quiet determination, a calm I hadn't felt in years. A sense that my husband's attorney wasn't calling me for nothing. So I got ready, hands trembling only slightly, and drove to his office. He greeted me warmly and waved me into the same chair I'd sat in after my husband died. The same chair where I learned what my husband had left behind for our son, and the same chair where I'd tucked away a mountain of grief. Now I sat in it again, not grieving but bracing. Marion, he said gently, before we talk details, I need you to understand something. He slid a thick folder toward me. Everything in here was put together by your husband with one purpose. He paused. To protect you, my breath caught. I hadn't expected that, not today, not after last night, not after being told I was a burden. Protect me from what? My voice trembled. From being mistreated, he said, from being pushed out. From being disrespected by the people who benefit from your husband's estate. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Benefit, his estate, their future, all suddenly tangled with the humiliation I'd endured. He opened the folder. Your husband set conditions, he continued. Safeguards most families never use, they only activate if you notify us that you're being mistreated by Daniel or his household. My stomach tightened. Notify us. As if my husband had somehow known that one day there might be a moment just like last night, a moment where I'd stand alone in a restaurant being humiliated by the very people he'd hoped would love me. I didn't notify anyone, I whispered. I didn't even know this existed. He nodded. You didn't have to, someone else did, I blinked. Who? A witness, he said, someone who was at the restaurant. They called our office this morning and reported what happened to you. I felt my breath hitch. A stranger, someone who saw everything and cared enough to act even when my own family didn't. My eyes burned. What does that mean for Daniel? I asked carefully. He closed the folder. It means, he said softly, that your husband's safeguards have officially been triggered, and by law we must now review everything connected to your son's household. A chill ran down my spine. Everything, property, accounts, trusts, long-standing documents they'd taken for granted, all suddenly under review, and not because I sought revenge, not because I wanted trouble, but because a stranger saw what my family refused to see. And because my husband had prepared for a day I never thought would come, a day that was now quietly unfolding. What happened next, even I wasn't prepared for. I sat there, frozen in that chair, as the weight of my husband's foresight settled over me like a blanket I didn't know I'd needed. The attorney watched me carefully, giving me space to breathe, to absorb, to steady myself. Because the truth, I wasn't steady, not even close. All those years of being patient, gentle, understanding, trying not to be a burden to anyone. And now I was learning that the man I loved had seen what I refused to see, that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most willing to place you last. I wiped my eyes discreetly. So, what happens now? The question felt like stepping onto thin ice. He folded his hands. Now, Marion, we begin the formal review. A review, such a simple word. But the meaning behind it shook me. Your husband set something up that's rarely used, he explained. It allows us to reassess every allocation connected to Daniel if there is evidence of mistreatment toward you. Mistreatment. That word alone made my throat tighten. He continued softly, choosing each word like he knew it might bruise. The financial distributions, the investment access, the trust accounts, all of it. I swallowed hard. All of it could change? Yes, his voice was calm. Your husband believed that respect within a family should never become optional. The room felt smaller. Daniel had no idea. My granddaughter had no idea. My daughter-in-law, absolutely no idea, and yet their choices last night had set something into motion that couldn't be easily stopped. The attorney leaned forward. I want you to understand this isn't punishment, this is protection. Your husband simply believed that anyone who benefits from his estate should also uphold the dignity of the woman he built that estate with. My chest tightened as another wave of emotion hit me. My husband, even gone, was still standing beside me, still shielding me, still loving me in a way I'd forgotten how to expect. The attorney gathered a few papers. We'll notify Daniel in the morning. He'll have an opportunity to respond. But given the witness report and the severity of the behavior, he paused, letting the weight settle. The trust board will take this very seriously. My pulse quickened. A board reviews consequences. All triggered because a stranger had stood up for me when my own family didn't. As I left the office, my hands trembled, not with fear anymore, but with a quiet, rising strength, a strength I hadn't felt in years. Because now, everything was moving, everything was shifting, everything was finally coming into the light, and I had no idea just how explosive the next step would be, but I was about to find out. Very, very soon. Morning came quietly. The kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting. I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, trying to steady the storm rushing through my chest. Because today, Daniel was going to learn what none of them ever imagined. That last night's cruelty didn't just hurt me emotionally, it triggered something legally, something irreversible. A soft knock came at the door. My heart tightened. I already knew who it was. I opened the door to find Daniel, my son, standing on the porch looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red, his posture small. And behind him, his wife and daughter waited in the car, watching me like I was the problem. He stepped inside slowly. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracking, "what's going on? Why did I get an email saying our accounts are under review? What did you do?" I swallowed hard. "Daniel, I didn't do anything." A beat, a breath, a truth he wasn't ready for. "Your father did." His eyes widened, confusion mixing with fear. I explained gently, carefully about the trust review, the protections his father built, the clause triggered by mistreatment. I described none of the numbers, none of the consequences, just enough for him to understand that things were shifting beneath his feet. When I finished, he sat in silence, hands pressed to his forehead as if holding his world together. "Mom, I didn't know it went this deep. I didn't know any of this." My voice softened. "Daniel, this isn't about money, this is about respect. Your father wanted to make sure his family was treated with dignity." He swallowed hard. "She said you were exaggerating. She said you'd ruin dinner. She said you—" I gently placed my hand on his. "Sweetheart, you saw it with your own eyes, you heard her, you watched your daughter repeat it." His face broke. And in that moment, I didn't see a grown man, I saw my little boy, lost and scared, trying to build a life with people who didn't value the roots that raised him. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I don't know how to fix this." The truth, it wasn't his to fix. Some consequences belong exactly where they land. I hugged him the way I used to when scraped knees felt like the end of the world. He cried into my shoulder. And when he finally pulled back, his eyes were steady. "What happens now?" he asked. I gave a quiet, honest answer. "Now, Daniel, we let the truth do what it always does." He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. A soft, real peace. Because whatever happened next, this family would finally be built on honesty, not humiliation. And speaking of humiliation, if you want to hear a story where another daughter-in-law crossed a line she never should have crossed and paid for it by morning, you have to watch my previous video. It's the one where she slapped in front of 287 guests and thought she'd get away with it. Trust me, you'll want to see exactly how that ended. Tap the video on your screen now.